The air in the room is heavy, but you're still smiling. You just said yes to a favor. Well, that will cost you your only night of sleep this week. Your heart is racing, a dull throb. Christine is starting behind your eyes and your stomach is tied in a knot you've lived with for so long. It feels like a part of your anatomy. You are the kindest person anyone knows. You are the a, reliable one, the saint, the person who always shows up. But if you caught your reflection in on a dark window right now, you wouldn't see a saint. You'd see a ghost. You'd see someone, Ira Ana, whose eyes are screaming for an exit while their mouth continues to offer help. Behind that smile, something is fermenting, something heavy, something dark. We've been taught that kindness is an uncomplicated virtue, a pure, one golden light. But kindness has a shadow. And if you keep ignoring that shadow, it won't just golden light. But kindness has a shadow. And if you keep ignoring that shadow, it won't just of being too good. We're exploring why your selflessness might actually be a form of self-destruction. And how your niceness is training the world to overlook you, and why the most dangerous person, Arno, in the room is alert, not the one who shouts. It's the one who never says no until the day. Anna, they finally break. It starts so quietly you don't even notice the bars being built around you. Think back to the child you were. Maybe you noticed that when you were loud or angry, keen or demanding, the adults around you grew cold. But when you were helpful, when you were quiet, when you anticipated their needs before they even spoke, that's when the warmth came. That's Akona when you were told you were a good kid. In that moment, a bridge was built. He and your developing brain. On one side was love, and on the other was self-sacrifice. You learned Ahurwa with the survival instinct of a creature who depends entirely on its pack, that your needs, Tuwadan, were a threat to your safety. You learned that to be loved was to be useful. Psychologists Namla call this sociotropy, a personality trait characterized by an excessive investment in interpersonal relationships. But for Namla call this sociotropy, a personality trait characterized by an excessive investment in interpersonal relationships. But for of kindness, not because you were overflowing with joy, but because you were terrified of the sort of silence that would follow if you stopped giving. But here's the problem with masks. They don't silence that would follow if you stopped giving. But here's the problem with masks. They don't hush years asking, what do they need? You lose the ability to answer the question, what do I need? Your internal compass doesn't just malfunction, it vanishes. You become the friend who listens to Owana, the 3-hour breakup story while your own life is falling apart. You become the employee who takes on the extra project because you don't want to let the team down. Even as your physical health begins to crater, you aren't being kind. You are performing a role to keep the world from rejecting you. And as any actor will tell you, the longer the play Arshu runs, the more the character begins to kill the person playing it. We like to think of kindness as a moral choice, but your body knows it's a biological transaction. There is another concept called pathological altruism. It's the point where the act of giving becomes a literal poison. A to the giver. Research from the University of Berkeley has shown that while voluntary, authentic kindness releases oxytocin and reduces cortisol, obligatory kindness does the exact opposite. When you say yes, but your entire being is screaming no, your brain perceives a threat. It triggers the amygdala, the almond-shaped center of fear in your brain. Your body floods with adrenaline and cortisol, preparing for a sure fight or a flight that never comes because you're too busy being polite. Imagine living in that state for years. Chronic stress isn't just a feeling, it's a physiological erosion. It weakens the immune system, inflames the heart, and creates a brain fog that makes it impossible to think clearly about your own boundaries. This leads to what specialists call compassion fatigue. It's a state of emotional bankruptcy. You've handed out so many withdrawals from your emotional bank account that you've hit rock bottom, but the world keeps coming to your teller. Window with its hand out. And because you've built your entire identity on being the kind one, you feel a crushing sense of guilt for being tired. You feel like, we a fraud. You think a truly kind person wouldn't feel this resentful. A truly kind, person would be happy to help. But that's the lie. Resentment isn't a sign that, Hana, you're a bad person. Resentment is your soul's way of screaming that you are being out-bullied by yourself. It is the smoke rising from a fire that is currently burning. You down your house. If you don't listen to the resentment, it doesn't go away. It just goes underground. Now let's look at the part of kindness that no one wants to talk about, how it affects the people around you. We often think of the who are too kind person as a victim, but there is a darker, more subtle dynamic at play. When you refuse to set boundaries, you are actually training the people in your life to be selfish. If you always adjust, they never have to. If you would tease you always forgive without a conversation, they never have to grow. By being endlessly kind, you, Anadon, are effectively creating a world where no one has to consider your feelings. You are teaching your partner, your children, and your friends that your needs are negotiable. Over time, this creates a profound sense of invisibility. You start to notice that people don't even already ask what you want anymore. They just assume. They say, oh, Sarah won't mind, and she's so sweet. But sweetness shouldn't mean absence of self. There is also the she phenomenon of the covert contract. This is one of the most toxic elements of the dark side of kindness. A covert contract is an unspoken agreement you make in your head. If I am kind enough to you, then you will love me / respect me / not leave me. But because the other person doesn't know about this contract, they eventually break it. They forget your birthday, or they don't say thank you, or they choose someone else. And when they do, your kindness turns into a sharp, jagged weapon of bitterness. You think after everything I've done for them? This is where the saint becomes the martyr. And a martyr is just someone who uses their suffering to make everyone else feel guilty. It is a form of emotional manipulation wrapped in the velvet of niceness. It's a way of saying, look how much I'm bleeding for you, as a way to control the people around you. True kindness doesn't keep score, but the kindness born of fear always has a ledger. What happens to all that repressed anger? All the no's you swallowed? All the times you smiled through gritted teeth while someone took advantage of you? They don't evaporate. Energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be transformed. In the shadows of the hundredth kind soul lives a monster. This is the shadow self that Carl Jung wrote about. The more you try to be a creature of pure light, the darker and more repressed, and your shadow becomes. For the too kind person, this monster manifests in two ways. First, there is the slow leak. This is the passive aggression, the forgetting to do something for someone you're secretly mad at, the subtle, biting comments disguised as jokes, and the coldness that creeps into your voice. You're still being nice, but there's a thin layer of ice over everything you do. The second way is the explosion. And this is what happens when the pressure becomes too much. Years of self-neglect, years of being overlooked, years of saying it's fine when it was definitely not fine, all culminate in a single moment of absolute rage. It's the nice guy who suddenly snaps. It's the perfect wife who walks out without a word and never looks back. When the monster finally comes out of the basement, it doesn't just ask for a boundary. It burns the whole house down. And the tragedy is that the people around you are shocked. They say, I don't know what happened. They were always so kind. They didn't see the explosion coming because you spent your whole life making sure the fuse was hidden. But you cannot build a life on a foundation of lies, even kind lies, and expect it to stand. Every time you say yes when you mean no, you are committing a small act of self-betrayal. Do that enough times and there will eventually be no self left to betray. Now let's look at the oxygen mask principle. You've heard it on every flight. Which put your own mask on first before assisting others. We resist this because it feels selfish. But if you pass out from lack of oxygen, you are useless. One to the person next to you. In fact, you become a burden to them. Kindness without boundaries is just a slow way of passing out. True kindness, and one requires the courage to be disliked. It requires the strength to say, I love you, but I cannot do this for you. Or I care about your other feelings, but I also care about my own rest. Boundaries are not walls. Irene, they are the gates that determine who gets access to your energy. Without them, when you aren't a person, you're a doormat. And the problem with being a doormat is that people eventually stop noticing you're there. They just use you to wipe the mud off their shoes. We need to reframe our definition of a good person. A good person isn't someone who erases themselves for others. A good person is someone who is whole, who is authentic, and who chooses to share their abundance with the world. Think of the difference between a sponge and a fountain. A sponge can only give if it's squeezed, and eventually it runs dry and becomes brittle. A fountain, however, gives because, it is overflowing. The water it shares is the excess. To become a fountain, you have to tend to your own basin. You have to value your own sleep, your own peace, and your own no as much as you value. Where everyone else's yes, this will be uncomfortable. If you've been the kind one, your whole life, people will react poorly when you start setting boundaries. They will, call you different. They might even call you selfish. Let them. The people who get angry when you set a boundary are usually the people who benefited from you having none. Their anger isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that the boundary was desperately needed. In the end, the ultimate act of kindness isn't what you do for others. It's the honesty you bring to the world. When you stop wearing the mask, you give everyone else permission to take theirs off too. You move from a kindness based on fear to a kindness based on freedom. And that is where the light is. Not in the absence of shadows, but in the courage to face them, to set down the weight of everyone else's expectations, and to finally, for the first time in your life, be kind to yourself, because you cannot pour from an empty cup. And you shouldn't have to break your own heart to keep someone else's beating. The dark side of kindness is a lonely place, but the door's open. Morally, all you have to do is say the one word you've been terrified of. I've saying for years, no. And then watch as the world doesn't end, but your one life finally begins. Now let's pause and reflect here. If you've ever felt this, the exhaustion, the resentment, the sense of being invisible, even though everyone already calls you so kind, you're not alone. You're not broken. You're not defective. What you're experiencing is the natural consequence of a world that doesn't teach us how to balance giving with protecting ourselves. It's the monster within, not because you're bad, but because unexpressed truths eventually demand to be seen. And this brings us to the real question. How do we embrace kindness without letting it destroy us? How do we stay compassionate without turning into martyrs? Or how do we love others without abandoning ourselves? So how do we do it? How do we embrace kindness in a way that heals instead of harms? The answer lies in one simple but deeply uncomfortable truth. Kindness must begin with you, not in a selfish disregard for others kind of way, but in the sense that if your kindness doesn't include yourself, then it isn't truly kindness at all. It's performance, and performance eventually collapses. Think none of it like this. If you've ever flown on an airplane, the safety instructions. In an emergency, put your oxygen mask on first, before assisting others. At first glance, that advice feels almost wrong, almost unnatural. Why would I not help my child or my loved one? First, but the logic is undeniable. If you pass out from lack of oxygen, you can't help anyone. The same principle applies to kindness. If you neglect your own needs, your own rest, your own well-being, your ability to truly care for others eventually suffocates. This is where boundaries enter the picture, and boundaries for many kind people feel terrifying. Boundaries feel like rejection. They feel like selfishness. They feel like shutting our people out. But in reality, boundaries are the purest form of honesty. A boundary says, this is what I can give, and this is what I cannot. It says, my love is real, but it cannot. I exist if I'm empty. It says, I care enough to show you my limits, because without them, my care will rot into resentment. Psychologists describe boundaries as the invisible lines that define where you end, and where another person begins. Without those lines, relationships blur into dependency, manipulation, or silent suffering. With them, relationships become clear, mutual, and grounded in respect. It means truth. That's the kind of kindness the world needs most. Not endless yeses, not silent suffering, but the courage to love without losing.